Hi, welcome to NiceTalk, the crypto show by NiceHash, where we feature expert commentary from around the crypto industry. Today, I'm very happy to welcome BitsBeTrippin Carter joining us today. Who's going to talk about all things mining. So we're going to dive deep into all the many aspects of mining with a really experienced miner guy today. So welcome to the show. Can you start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I usually go by BBT Carter. It's been a thing since back in the day. I got into crypto pretty early. Started mining in 2010, so that's pretty early, late 2010. Found that from folding at home. I used to do a lot of like folding at home and SETI at home, just essentially taking my extra compute power and doing things with it, and found Bitcoin very early on one of those forums where somebody said, hey, you can put some computational power to this thing, you'll win these tokens, but it's this new network. Did that from just like a kind of a side thing just to see how that would work, and it was not about at the time it wasn't like, oh, this thing could be worth a lot. It was more of just like computational power thing. Then started exploring it a little further, and doing like most people back in that day, putting things in like milk cartons and trying to overclock the old 5770s and 6950s and all those old AMD cards back then, and then slowly turned that into where it became more than a hobby. And then by that time I was like, you know what, there's not a YouTube channel on this, like explaining this stuff. It was just all forums, right? Bitcoin Talk forum and a couple other little side forums that people would talk on, and felt like it needed a place on the internet when it came to like visual. Like there wasn't really a lot of faces behind like setup and all that. And so I made BitsBeTrippin back in 2013, and it was with kind of an entertainment flair with it a little bit, try to get people excited into the space, wanted to see what was out there. And I'm like a hardware nerd anyways. I like checking to see what something's capable, pushing it to the limits, that kind of thing. And yeah, it just it was kind of a rabbit hole that then pulled in to really put a heavy focus on it, and build a lot of content. I mean, almost 800 videos in total if you count the Twitch stream. Since then, about 2,500 hours plus of content on the internet. So it's a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of people in it, and it's one of the best communities out there, bar none. And I mean, I used to do competitive racing, like with SCCA. I used to do a lot of different things on, hobby. I was a very hobbyist type of person. I do a lot of sports and stuff. Compared to all those different communities, crypto is a very unique community. So it just, everybody likes to share their stuff, like share the config and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it really just kept the energy to keep building more content and expanding it.
So I'm not sure if you. So the question here is: are you living off the mining? Of course, I think you are. I'm guessing. I hope that's not a weird question for you, but
yeah, no, it's not at all.
Yeah. When did you start living off of it? How long did it took for you to get to the point when?
The real switch over, I could have in 2016 if I wanted to sell a lot of coin. But really after 2017 is where, I could have got away from like a day job type of thing. As we really started scaling up our own operations to like I would say a good size, medium sized farm. It started with about 800 cards and went all the way up to about 27. Now we're at about 2,700 total GPUs. And then we've added ASICs since then. So it's, that was good enough. And then like the one thing people are like, oh, if you're YouTubing, you're making you don't make anything. Like you make very minimal on YouTube. from like a Google AdSense standpoint, you really need to take like sponsors and that kind of thing. And I had not taken any sponsors until this last year. So I've had a YouTube channel from 2013 through now current, and I turned down all the sponsor stuff. Like I was just like, you know what, I'm just observe and report. And I would work with folks like that were wanting to get their services or their hardware known. Like I would buy the unit. I said, hey, it's like, this is the best deal for you because I'm just going to test it anyways, and you're just going to get the honest feedback on it. And that really worked out to really kind of expand the brand and make sure people understood just the way I was approaching it. Right, I still was doing a day job, and crypto was still doing okay, so I kind of hedged both. And even today, I still do consulting work with my prior job, my prior full-time job, and that's it still keeps me enough energy. I mean, this is a busy space, but you can kind of get like once everything's kind of running, you're like, okay, now what, right? So,
exactly.
So you can keep yourself busy.
So what was it like you mentioned you started out in 2010.
Okay.
What was it like back, like the mining scene at that time?
Yeah, so that there wasn't really. So like I found it just by chance on a folding at home forum. So people would talk about configs and like different, can you do multi GPU? At that time, it was essentially 2 GPUs was it, right? It was like you could do Crossfire with AMDs. NVIDIA was exploring SLI when it came to like the 6600 series or the 6800 Ultra series and that. So that was like the tech stack then. And it was really like, can you put 2 GPUs together and do stuff? And somebody had shown, this distro that you could download and you could mine locally and how to get that set up. And I was like, well, I'll try something different. It's computational. Why not? Let's see what yield or hash rate I could get. And that's really what it was. It was just a back and forth on the hardware side. It wasn't so much about the token at the time. So in 2010, it was more of like, what could you do with this network? What's the point of it? That's cool. I can send these tokens back and forth to each other. And that was it. I mean, it was not really any focus on money, I would say, until early 2011 when there started being like OTC trade desk on it. And then you had the Mt. Gox, putting an exchange up, and then you had BTCE come online. You had like all of these, like this expansion from this concept that there was money involved with it. I mean, there was people talking about price discovery and stuff, but I wasn't really tracking that. I was still on that kind of like, I just want to get a lot of tokens. I want to see if I can get, how many blocks can I win type of thing. So it was more that kind of focus than it was about the money at the time. And I think around that 2011 timeframe, it started going, oh, wait a minute here. Like, if this is getting that kind of price discovery, maybe someday it might be worth something more than a couple dollars. And, just trying to figure out, like, there was no rational discussion on if it was like from a mining standpoint as a like covering power. Like it wasn't even a thought then. It was like, I'm using power. And mind you, most of the farms then were just like 4 to 6 GPUs. Maybe you had some crazy person that went with like 12, but like they were 2 card machines sitting in a box. And then early 2011, you started seeing some pictures on the forums of people putting them in, like getting them out of the box, trying not to do the 3-way SLI type of thing because it was baking the cards. And that's when like the first ribbon risers started coming out and that kind of thing. So that was kind of the evolution of it. And none of us knew anything about, riser draw power. Everything was direct connect. You were burning up boards. I mean, that kind of thing. So it was very vanilla. But it was still super hardware side until I would say that end of 2011, end of 2012 before the first halving. And you had that run up from like $2 and some change. And it was like my birthday's on November 15th. So November 14th, I remember doing my first OTC trade on for Bitcoin of 2011. And Bitcoin at the time was $2.67. So it was like, that was the first concept, like, hey, this stuff used to be worth nothing to pennies. People would just hand it to each other to, wow, well, this is actually worth real money. If you're trying to buy thousands of Bitcoin, you're going to spend a couple $1,000s, and that run up right there at that November of 11 to December of 11 into the beginning of 12, it went from $2.67 to like almost $200. And that's when it got on the news and people were like, what's this thing? And that's when you know, like realize like, wow, this is actually an instrument, a financial instrument. And then you started seeing, you know, a lot of other content creators at that February timeframe. A lot of the most earliest people, Stefan, I can't think of his last name, on YouTube that does a lot of does the Freedom podcast, and like the cypherpunk kind of side of it started really making content around Bitcoin, you know, around the messaging around what Bitcoin's ethos and stuff was, and then it started to be bigger than just, you know, us miners just trying to uphold the network, right? And that's when it really started getting some.
I remember I started mining in 2012, or at least I heard for Bitcoin back then, and I think Bitcoin was around $20, something like that. And me and my brother wanted to buy Bitfury ASICs. Do you remember the first ASICs that came that were available? I think that they were Bitfury or Butterfly
Labs. So
yeah,
Avalon,
something.
Yeah, Avalon A1s I think were a little after, but Butterfly Labs came out and was putting out the Jalapeno, which was the first kind of, you know.
Did you maybe get a chance to order one at the time?
Yeah, I did. I ordered 2 jalapenos. I got one of them, and I actually every Thursday I try to throw up like a Throwback Thursday type of thing, and I posted a picture of the first like week I had it. And its output, how much Bitcoin it was earning. It was earning at essentially every 4 hours, 0.2 Bitcoin every 4 hours, right? So, and that was for 8 gig of hash. And it wasn't like, you do the math on it, I think I paid $800 for it at the time. And it was like, oh, the ROI is going to be like 9 months. I'm like, I guess that's okay. You know, like it was like, you know, you hindsight now, it's like, you know, that's like 2.5 Bitcoin a month.
Yeah. And were you aware at the time for like ASICs and decentralization and all the stuff that like most of the miners hate about ASICs right now?
Yeah.
How were your feelings about that at the time?
I mean, I think it's inevitability predicated on price discovery versus yield. So it's like if something's highly profitable, you're going to have a huge motivation of a whole bunch of people that are going to try to figure out the most efficient way to do that. And then you have like the ethos of trying to make sure that the big machine or a couple entities can't do that. So they'll pivot the algorithm, kind of like Monero has done and Ravencoin's done. I think it comes back down to that ethos of like, what are you trying to do? And is there a fair market participation? I think as all of this stuff starts to get much larger, you know, Bitcoin rises through its next halving. And if we're talking $200,000, $300,000 Bitcoin price and the sea rises all boats type of thing, it's going to drive Intel, AMD, everybody will start to try to build like more specified solutions. But, you know, I've always put it back to, I'm not against the ASICs as more as I'm against the concept that one company now controls everything, and that they don't, there's not a huge retail market on that where it's not at a store. I mean, part of the allure, and I always have told everybody, is that if you get lost on the internet one night, you find one of our videos or somebody else's video, and you discover this whole thing about like being a participant, and the fact that you can become a participant in that sitting without asking for permission, and now you're contributing to that network, and you're circumstantially compensated in a token, and you wake up that next morning and you actually have a payout, and you're like, okay, this is interesting. I can become a participant. That's huge. And if you take that away where you've separated that to where now somebody has to like go outside to try to find this company, maybe pay the wrong price, or you have to wait, or there's delays, all this other stuff to then participate, I think you've disjoined the point of that decentralization concept. Yeah. And people are like, well, you guys have a bigger farm and you guys are, you lose the social, you lose that engagement. Yeah.
I think there will be like an issue with supply, as we see right now with GPUs. There simply isn't enough supply. If there would be enough supply, the difficulty would jump up. The mining wouldn't be so profitable. Maybe it would go like to the minimum. We would have minimum profits. So
Correct. It would be essentially the bear market style, right?
Yeah,
Where
but yes, but if the hardware isn't optimized, and so you have like a price rising, and you also need to have a difficulty rising at the same speed. And if the difficulty is not rising so fast, it stays behind, and then you have more and more hardware which draw more and more power, which is causing issues, right? We're seeing like we're seeing right now with Russia and I think Kosovo.
They're seeing the strain on it because the incentive is there to more hardware production.
Exactly, and then you have more power consumption, and it's just like a rabbit hole. You go more power, more hash rate until you reach that point of like how do you call it?
Equilibrium.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that if there will be new devices, they really have to be efficient to match up the price. To match up the price for the difficulty.
I mean, I think the incentives are structured in a way that the producers are literally like you can see the tech stack as it went since back in like 2011, where you had kind of super inefficiency. They were at the back of the bus when it came to like the fabrication on the silicon side. So like they were at 14 nanometer, 20 nanometer. And now Bitcoin mining in most ASIC architectures at the front of the stack, right, where they're leading the investment piece, from we see Intel's coming out with a new chip with very low wattage. They're at the tip of the spear. So they're now at that trying to push for 5 nanometer architecture and fabrication. So, and then the incentive is there for them to try to drive that tooling faster than even the commercial market, because the output of like the commercial stuff, like at the 7 nanometer level, like for like AMD and Intel, and I mean I think even NVIDIA, like when we switch back to GPUs, like NVIDIA, most of their architecture is like 8 nanometer. They're not even at the 7 nanometer. Some of their stuff is going to be 7 nanometer, but like they have no real hard requirement to like drive that even faster from a power savings or than that, because their capability of output is, frames per second on a video game using features and stuff. So like it doesn't have the same motive to drive the wattage down and all that because it's so tied to like ops costs. So, I think it's a natural progression that it's going to try to drive down, the architecture. It's just really on the GPU side and the people that can buy things at, local stores. I'm actually surprised. If I was making a prediction in 2016, I would have said if Bitcoin would have hit these different levels and some of these other coins, Ethereum hitting 4,800, who would have thought it? We would have seen a much more proliferation into the retail space with like having very custom setups, or even like Bitcoin miners in like the USB miners, and shout out to the few folks that have won a few blocks on a few
yeah, exactly.
But having those like at micro centers and like Best Buys and all these different retail locations, like having those just on the shelves too, right? Like there's an entire market of people that'd be like, oh, I'm going to buy this graphics card. Oh, I can buy a USB miner for $90, right? I'll just do that too, right? And seeing a retail push, because it comes back to that whole story where you can become a participant. I've always looked at it like participation first, then start to understand the dynamics, and then you can start to chart out like, are you trying to make this passive income or anything else, right? Participation always first. That way you get to understand the market, because there's going to be some people that think they want to be miners and then they try it. And I always tell people on the channel, I'm like, start with one GPU. Don't go buy a big setup. Like, understand what you're getting into. Don't get buyer's remorse type of stuff. So start small, understand the network, understand how to move coins around, secure your wallet, all that, then scale up if you're comfortable with it and want to put the time into it. And I think that's where that retail push allows people to kind of get 1-2 things at a time and then scale up. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, with the ESG talks right now, and you were looking at the different countries dealing with like the immediate growth on power, and it all comes back down to, hash rate always, it's a rolling wave. So price goes up, hash rate follows like a wave behind it.
Yeah.
And it kind of tells off. If the price sets down, that wave is still a little higher, and then it'll recede if profitabilities hit a certain, I would say global average kilowatt per hour cost, which like 12 to 14 cents, if you hit equilibrium at 12 to 14 cents on like an S19, you're going to figure out like if they're at that, which I think right now is like $25,000 Bitcoin price, 22,000, somewhere around there at 14 cents per kilowatt, is where those folks will be even. And then on the GPU side and Ethereum side, it's like 1.7 terahash. It's like almost double where it's at right now at like $3,000. So it's like we're seeing it at almost 900. It hit 1 petahash, the Ethereum network did, but it's still highly profitable. And comparable to a lot of other times. And
exactly, I think people are like screaming all around that it's not profitable to mine anymore, but in reality, it's still very profitable.
Yeah, and it's if Ethereum, and then we get back into this little baby bear market that we're in right now, and it looks like there's a lot of struggle. I don't know if we hold these levels. I mean, I see people talking like 20,000 stuff. It's a different time. Like there's a lot more. The liquidity stack is a lot different. The opportunity stack's a lot different. The engagement level's completely different, right? Where you have people that now have accounts. The first step is get an account and then tie some other kind of revenue piece to it. And then, some kind of funding source. And then you look at in 2017 run up and then pull back. Infrastructure was built during that time. So now there's all these different locations. I mean, PayPal, Robinhood, Webull, all these like quick apps that people can be like, oh, it looks down. I'm going to buy some, right? I was out. And, you're looking at retail, chew it up right now.
Yeah, exactly.
36,000, but.
Yeah. Another thing worth mentioning is that I think the price won't be so volatile as it was before, because people know if it goes down, it's time to buy. So there will be less and less up and downs like it's this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's all going to come back down to scarcity too, right? So there is only so many, and there's a lot of holders. I mean, that it's becoming a subculture of total, right? So it's like, and then as more other instruments, this is stuff that a lot of people don't track, is the other instruments to where you can get to a point where you don't need to sell your crypto, you can borrow against it. As that starts to really get more refined, now you're creating taxable events. At least in the US, you're not creating taxable events because you're locking it up in BlockFi and you're borrowing against your crypto. It's a debt position, right? And you're only borrowing 35% equivalent. So it has to drop 65% for you to get liquidated. So it's a lot safer position if you needed to get access to liquidity. As more of those instruments and those, opportunities arise to allow people to leverage their crypto and not sell it, now you got this locked up rate, because now people are borrowing against their crypto. That's locked up, right? So now they're not moving it. They're already got a position against it. And I think more and more scarcities.
Yeah, I think a good thing. I mean, when friends ask me about Bitcoin price and so on, I always tell them that there's 21 million of Bitcoins and there's like 40 something millions of millionaires. So if only 1 millionaire would get a half of it, they would run out of Bitcoins.
Yeah, it's and as more, this is where the regulatory front, at least, and I talk a lot more specific to like US, but like the regulatory fronts is they're trying to figure out enforcement and the lawmaking side, all this other stuff, like how do the entities like banks and stuff interact with it. Like in the US, I mean, there's a lot of FUD that comes around, but what they're doing is trying to figure out how does it fit in the stack. And right there for me tells me, well, they're not trying to put the baby out with the bathwater. They're just literally trying, like, how do I tax it? How do I keep, malicious activity, at least gated? And they're looking at how that will interact. So there's a lot of different participants, building businesses in areas that are a little more regulatory friendly. You got Texas, Washington, Wyoming, these states. And then the U.S. structures are the feds will come out with rules. The states will go, I kind of agree with that, but we're going to do something to lock you up in court for 2 years while we all debate this, and we're going to let it happen. So that's the interesting thing about the structure of something like the United States that has like their enforcement and their lawmaking in different departments, and they can just fight with each other. And then the states is a whole other layer. And like I used to work for a company, Anheuser-Busch. It was a beer company. You probably know them, Budweiser, Stella Artois, because it became Ambev. And I used to do a lot of pricing work with them. So pricing and margin, that's where kind of like the nerdy, like statistical side from Bitcoin and stuff comes from on me. is looking at all the rulemaking, like all the way down in the states. It all goes all the way down to the county level, right? So like it could get that, and counties are just a lot smaller parts of states in the country, and they can have completely different rules. Like in the beer side, and I can see it fragmenting like this, is why I'm mentioning it, is in like on the beer side, you could have 5%, and then a county right next to it that only does 3% alcohol, and you have one that's dry, right? And then the wholesaler could be to the right of it, and the wholesaler doesn't even allowed to put like the writing on the truck. They have to go with a blank truck because they got to drive through a dry county, and they don't want to see Budweiser driving through. Deliver. So like there's all these like micro rules that end up fragmenting across the states to allow things to occur. The bottom line is that there's certain areas that are always going to allow it and push for it. And I think we're seeing that established in Texas. We're seeing that established in Washington and Wyoming, where they're putting a stake in the ground and saying, we want to service the participants that want to be part of this network, from, retail getting in, to mining infrastructure, power infrastructure, all the things that are enabling people to get into this, and then all the financial instruments, the people that are like, all that stuff sounds cool, I want to invest in it, I don't want to know anything else, I just want my money to work for me in that sector, right? And we're seeing that all get structured out. So if people are like, man, are you not bullish on Bitcoin? I'm like, dude, like, yes, like in every way. And I mean, I know like our vision that if you're in this space is very myopic to it, but like I'm stepping back and looking at like, what are the things that could break the momentum from regulatory, from enforcement, from, countries that are trying to figure it out themselves and banning because they have a little more overreach on making decisions, like shutting off the internet. They did in Kazakhstan,
it gets complicated very quickly.
It gets complicated, but they're going to figure it out. I think that there's enough momentum for people to educate. So some of those actions are knee jerk because they have the power to do it, but then they're going to feel the pressure of it, like not just on a country stage, they're feeling it on a world stage, right? Like a lot of folks in like the US hear Kazakhstan and they don't even know where it's at on a map, but they do now, right? Because it's on the news. They're getting a lot more focused. I mean, look at what happened with El Salvador, blessing it as currency, right? Like they are on the world stage in a huge way that they would have never been on, right? So I think that people see that exposure and they see that pressure, and then it makes them second guess of like, should we be shutting down the internet for this? This is probably a bad idea. And then it goes back on, and now it's more of like, how do we maintain growth of power systems and all this other, and build a plan? Because I mean, people will react, and then they're going to go back into a boardroom and go, like, we need more power here if we want to participate. How do we do that? And then you'll see those things manifest. That stuff takes time. 18 months, 2 years down the line, we're coming into another halving, and now we're enabled again, like we were from the 2017 to now with the liquidity centers being able to take millions of people and not go offline. We're going to see that on the infrastructure side, I think, in the next 2 years. Very bullish on the mining side, proof of work, because participation again.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was ranting.
I was just going to say, bring it back to mining. It's very interesting what you're saying. Like, on a side note for this, it's kind of a good pointer for our users for one of the reasons why NiceHash has certain elements of the business not available in the US, because it gets extremely complicated very quickly when it comes to the regulation side of things. But yeah, let's bring it back a bit to mining. So in terms of your mining, like your daily mining, do you have some particular favorites that you like to play with? Like you mentioned a bit about ASICs versus GPUs. Are you more GPU kind of guy, or you play with a bit of both? Yeah,
for sure, more GPU. We are getting into some of the ASICs just because, I mean, and people have asked me, they're like, dude, you never talk about ASICs. You used to back in 2011 or 2014, 2015. I'd actually reviewed a lot of the ASICs that were coming up at that time, Sponduli Tech, a couple of the grid seed stuff like back in the day. And then I kind of went off of ASICs and went full GPU. And I've always liked the GPU side more. There's a lot more diversity and there's a lot more ability to participate for anybody. So that's why I put a lot of focus on that. I want more and more people to understand it. And I've seen the effect of folks that have tried it and they're like, you know what, not for me, but now they become a counterparty and they're buying the coin, right? So they're like, you know what, I'll just take a position in it. Well, that has a good effect for mining side, that if, you know, as more and more folks buy up scarcity, especially on the fixed, you know, limit coins like Bitcoin, Ravencoin, Litecoin, those different coins are proof of work that have upper limits, right? It puts the counterparty, we're effectively enabling the understanding of the counterparty to purchase coins too. So the ability to participate, I think, is very big. GPUs give you that best option. It could be an argument that CPU mining could do that. I'm a little less enthused on CPU mining because just the incentives, unfortunately, it gets it to where you can get into more botnet kind of stuff, because there are CPUs everywhere, and there's the structure and the simplicity of doing it on a CPU is a lot more simpler, because you can thread it in certain ways that make it a less, like, you don't need to load it up 100%. You can set it at 30% and just kind of trickle and create, you know, an incentive for people to build things for CPUs. GPUs a lot different. Like, you can do the same kind of thing, but it's a lot more complicated because the GPUs have a whole bunch of different tech stacks. And they're not all created equal, right? I mean, it could be the same GPU and one runs one setting, one run doesn't run setting. So I like that complexity that's involved with that. So a lot more on the GPU side than anything else. I like the problems in a weird way.
Okay, so
broken like that.
so if you are you more of AMD or NVIDIA guy, or do you care at all?
I've always liked AMD more, and I know that's even more of a pain. NVIDIA's drivers and their card traditionally is better. It's better output. It's usually less efficiency, short of the RDNA 2 stuff that NVIDIA or AMD's came out with. I think actually is better. Arguably between the 2060 Ti and the 6600 XT. I mean, they're, you know, around the same power profile, but the you know, I've liked AMD. AMD was a lot more responsive early, like Roy Taylor and some of the AMD folks. You know, they created a blockchain division back in 2014, and they've been very responsive. Roshawit, is it Roshawit? It's George.
George, yeah, George.
Yeah, George. Yeah. George's been awesome.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, back in the day with, like, when there was the issue with, like, the compute, you know, like, I was going back and forth with George. I mean, I know he was going back and forth with Claymore. We were trying to figure out, you know, issues related to the compute issue. I mean, just the engagement on the AMD side was always a lot better than NVIDIA. I mean, I literally at CES in 2018 shot up to the front after, you know, the NVIDIA CEO got off the stage, and I got I don't know how I did it. I got an interview with him ahead of all the other world media. And I try to hit him up on, like, hey, man, like, cryptocurrency, you can't find a GPU on this planet. Mind you, that was January of 18, which was the run-up of Ethereum in 17, you know, December of 17. So there wasn't, like, a GPU to be found. And I was just like, you guys don't talk about anything about crypto. Like, I have huge good discussions with AMD. Like, they're open. Like, they're not telling me anything that's, like, proprietary. They're engaged. I'm like, and I know you guys have an engagement team. So, like, are you guys working with any other? It was a lot more cryptic, right? So that's the part that I would push against NVIDIA, is their unwillingness to engage with the community.
We might actually have Jork on one of the next shows. We're not sure yet. So
he's great. I hope he gets on there.
And another thing is, I think you probably like AMD more because there's more problem with it. You have more tuning. With NVIDIA, you set it up, do a couple of tweaks, and off you go. But with AMD, there's memory timings. There's so much thing to do.
Yeah,
to keep you busy.
There's a little more, especially if you're, like, mixing rigs up with different types of, you know, cards, and the consistency difference, the fabrication difference,
even the memory manufacturer that can make problems,
the partners too. Like,
so what would be the most common issue you have with GPU rigs?
The number one issue, well, it depends, because the series had their own little specific issues. I would say on the newest stuff, they're actually really consistent. Besides probably, like, the 6800 and 6900s sometimes can be a little flaky. But, like, the 6600 is just rock solid. It works really good. So RDNA 2 stuff, pretty decent. Not a huge amount of problems. Step back into like the 5700. I still think it's one of the best ones that they ever produced. Next to probably Vegas 64, but like they are a little more finicky. If you put BIOSes on them, they're a little more not unstable. You know, on that series, so that whole 5000 series in general, but still had a decent set of output. My favorite was the Radeon 7 if it would have just functioned correctly all the time. Like it burned up. Like I think they overshot it, and I think they were trying to really go for the compute side on the HBM2 stuff. I mean, that thing 2.5 years, 3 years ago now? 3 years ago was doing 100 mega hash.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, is insane. Like they built it to just take over the, you know, but you don't have a long longevity. We had a total, I think, of, we had 21. We had 3 7-card rigs of those, and we have 6 left, to give you an idea. So there was a high fail rate on them.
So you never mentioned any issues about the risers. Are you using risers, or do you have GPUs plugged directly in the board?
Risers. I mean, so we had the version 7, like essentially version 7s of the risers on our farm in 2016, and we had, 2,500 GPUs. We probably went through maybe 100 risers over the whole entire time. So like we had bought double. So we were figuring we're going to have a pretty high fail rate. Let's buy 2,500 and let's buy another 2,500. So we bought 5,000 risers and we used about 100 on a replacement. So I have boxes of version 7 risers that we just didn't use. So I don't know if they were just the best. They were just the most consistent. The huge thing about risers that I've learned is understanding the amount of power that's being provided through them. And it really is dependent on the cards that you have. So like, I think a lot of that contribution was because we had RX 470 and 480 Sapphire mining editions. And like one of the things I cover on the channel is I do this test. We have a tool that was custom built that allows us to look at the riser power pool. Those cards, when configured down, and you're at like 790 millivolts on the output, 2000 memory, and I think like 1100 on the core, they pull 27 watts off the riser. So it's a very low amount as compared to like a fully optimized 5700 to pull 55 watts off the riser. So it's almost double. And what happens is that they just, when you're pulling that kind of power through them, even if you're 6-pinned into them versus like a SATA connector, they fell, you know. And you know, like the newer ones, especially like running like a 3090 I just showed on the video, we actually had one pull 108 watts through the riser with your full tilt, have everything turned up, nothing turned down, on like Ravencoin. It was pulling 108 watts off the riser, which is insane. Like I'm surprised the riser didn't catch fire, but you know, when you're tilted all the way down and optimized on like a 3090, you're still pulling 70 watts on that. So I think it comes down to just the design of them. And that's why, you know, a lot of people ask like, hey, why don't you have like Octominer cases or stuff that's built in single boards? I had one when they first came out, and within like, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks, we had a 5700 rig on it. I lost two of the onboard risers. And it's like, well, now I can't replace those that are built into the board. So that's why I don't go with it, because if I lose a riser on that board, then I have that slot gone. So yeah, I think it's management of it. We're trying to expand the channel content. We've hired 8 people, and I have 2 people that have really trained up that they could do all the troubleshooting. I have absolute confidence in them, and we're trying to record kind of a series of going back through. We have a little over 100 different GPUs here. I've kept a lot of them all the way back to like the 6950s. At least one of them, each of the types. So we're going to go back through with a series and do that riser power test with a couple different algorithms, just to show everybody essentially a matrix of like, here's what you're going to pull. So here's your configs and the impact on it. You know, especially as we get to Ethereum 2.0, if and when they actually switch it over, and people look at things like Ravencoin and things that are like ProgPow coins that are going to pull a little more juice. You know, how to optimize it to where you're not going for the top hash rate. You kind of back it down to save your hardware type of thing.
So what would be like 3 tips you could give to people starting out mining in 2022?
I would say start small. Like try, if you're brand new, one card. If you don't have a computer already that can mine, and there's different ways to mine. I mean, we're talking on, NiceTalk here today. So, doing NiceHash and doing a broker service to just let it optimize, let it configure your stuff, get a good test to understand, the load and understanding how, like, you get payouts and how you get your wallet set up. So start small, and then start to understand that, and then start to scale up to something that makes sense for within your budget, and understand the longer term that mining in general is about just yield. You're earning yield, and while you can book it to current price, it's always been a forecast for future. So there is a strategy to it. It isn't like you mine and you immediately sell. I've never recommended that. And I mean, we have to always do the not financial advice. I will tell you what I do. We never sell everything all the way, right? It doesn't make any sense. Even if we're at close to equilibrium profitability, where we hit like in March of 2020, where we had $86 Ethereum price, the network was about 153 terahash. You do the math on like 9 cents per kilowatt, you're right about there. Which we look at our all-in costs. We're about 6.5 cents at our big farm, but there's still delivery and we have people there. So I take all the costs and blend them up to see what my relative rate is to operate, and then turn that into an equation to figure out what my real operating percents per kilowatt is, which is a common way to do things. So most people kind of just look at their kilowatt hour, but you're investing time, and if you have other people helping you, you're investing that. Take all those costs, roll it into what your hash rate and your output is, and then get that as your kilowatt hour. Because at the end of the day, it's a bottom line thing. How much are you paying to run and operate? I don't care what your kilowatt hour cost is, right? It's like
it's the total amount of
it's your total cost, because that's what's coming out of your pocket. So it's figure out that rate, and then when is your equilibrium there? So get it optimized. So to go back to your question, start small. Take a look at your current rates, understand what you're going to be paying for power, because that's usually a shocker for people when they look at what the output is, and then they get their bill and they're like, wait a minute here, I mined like $200 in crypto and I have like $180 power bill. And you have to deduct the fact that your house and everything else is using power. So it wasn't that the miner costed you 180 and you usually pay 90. Take off that 90, now you've paid 90 in power. And you made 200 in crypto, and that's considered a profit, right? So understand and set yourself up to succeed by understanding the numbers, and then you've set your expectations accordingly. And then from that, partner up. Like if you're wanting to scale your operation, there's a ton of people out there that want to get into this, and look at maybe hedging some of that risk, and hedge some of that with, if you've learned the experience. Don't go in it alone. Like sometimes, mixing, friends and family with business kind of can be sketch, right? So understand who you're getting into business with. But like, there's a lot of enthusiastic people in this space. Go to meetups. We're trying to do that with our crypto world. So we have a retail store where we have like Bitcoin and coffee in the mornings on Tuesdays, and Bitcoin and beer on Thursday nights. And it's just, collaborative mining, very centric event where people are just talking about hash rates and like how they can optimize things. And then you might have an option where you can co-locate with somebody and that they have a better power deal. So ask around. Just don't accept your current home rate. There are options out there everywhere where people are already doing it. Maybe you can co-locate.
Okay.
So
maybe some tips on cleaning the GPUs. How do you take care of your GPUs? I mean, taking care of 2,500 GPUs or 27, you said.
Yeah, it's an event. So it's all around schedule. So like we just did a video yesterday where people are, really freaking out about prices and things pulling back, and they're like, oh, my profitabilities are down. Like I say, look at your operations. If it gets to the point where you're really close to equilibrium, never been a better time to shut down and clean your machines, right? So it keeps you engaged and keeps you motivated. It gets your mind off of prices and like, okay, it's time to clean. We were doing a biannual cleaning every year. So we would go through, pull GPUs. Usually it's in the peak of the summer for us up there, to where, if we're going to have a 90-degree day plus, like we'll shut down the farm. We have pretty good airflow through it. So we'd keep those on, and we'd go out and dust all the machines off, all that kind of stuff, and use that peak time where the cards are going to be running a lot hotter. And also we had interruptible power at the main farm, right? So which meant that on certain times, on peak days, like if it was like, 100-degree, Fahrenheit days, which is very warm, the power company could option us to ask for us to shut down, right? So because they're wanting the power for, they're going to have all these air conditionings on everywhere. So like any kind of interruptible, they were usually pretty cool about letting us know, like, hey, we're at peak. And we're going to, if we didn't shut down, they would just adjust our rate. So they had that clause, right? So we were like, good time to shut down and clean. So optimize your cleaning around known downtimes or known unknown downtimes. Just knowing that I'm going to be in peak. This is the time to do it. And if you build that on a schedule, just look at a long calendar. Like we actually have these like printout calendars, and we just kind of mark potential days so we can backwards plan to know that we got to be there. Like I'm not near the farm, about 550 miles, about 700 plus kilometers from the farm. So like I'm flying up there typically. So I try to optimize around that time. And there's never a perfect time unless it's down, like unless the power goes off or something. But yeah, optimize it and clean it. And we were doing biannually because we were air cooled in a larger warehouse. If you're in a home miner, just take a visual inspection. And then you could go probably 4 years without having to replace like paste and stuff. But at least for the Sapphire mining editions, whatever solution they used for the thermal transfer essentially dried up in about 2.5 years. So
really,
yeah,
I had some gaming Sapphires, and they were like beasts running for 4 years. Like they were like new.
Oh yeah. Some of them, like if they use the right kind of thermal paste, they were still fine. For our mining edition ones, they were like, it ended up turning into dust. Like you were just scraping it off. So, and the video we just did yesterday was on the cleaning process, because profits are down. I'm like, hey, just take your mind off of it, clean your machines. And then if it's too low and you have like crazy, because I mean some people have 24 cents per kilowatt, 33 cents. Like one guy reached out, it's like, hey, I have 33% per kilowatt, I'm no longer profitable. And I'm like, bro, like 33 cents, like you gotta find another way. Like that's expensive. So that's where I look at like cloud, like I don't want to say cloud hosting, but there's a new evolution of what was essentially like the old Genesis mining concept of like cloud mining, where you have co-location, where you own the asset and you're just looking at a booked rate. I've told people, like if you have 33 cent to 24 cent kilowatt, you may be able to divest that asset, still be a miner, and buy into another asset. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of GPU solutions with that. Actually, there's only like one or two that I know of.
There must be a reason, because GPU rigs can be like trouble all the way. With ASICs, you just set it up and forget it.
Correct. Yeah, you need to have a standard format. So that's what we're switching our farm to. We're switching to a standard like we had mostly the Sapphire mining editions, but again, we were talking about AMD earlier, like sometimes can be finicky. We're been benchmarking the A4000 amperes and the 5000 amperes. And we're splitting across both of them because it's just a supply thing to try to get that many GPUs. We had to split it across the two. We do have a sample of the 2000 coming, but having a workstation card that's kind of purpose built for tasks, and if we can find some good stability, there may be a future state to where, as we're building out this other larger farm, we're doing a bigger Bitcoin farm, we have goals to try to hit 10 megawatt within the next 2 years. So we're starting with 2 containers filled out with S19s, but the location and the pricing for the power that we're getting, we're looking at having a couple containers that we would be able to do a GPU mining rig potential solution for co-location. So, but it would come with requirements of like the same GPUs, and like the configuration management needs to be more consistent. So you can't have like your mix of stuff, because it's a lot more complex of a build, to maintain something like that. But, maybe future state for us, we'll be able to offer that colo for people.
Another common question I get a lot from beginners who are starting out with GPU mining is, how does the mining affect the longevity of the GPUs? How does it impact the lifespan?
If we got asked that question in 2016, I would have said, I don't know, because some of these other GPUs didn't really last long. But as we've learned taking care of them is huge. So making sure thermal pads, making sure thermal paste, watching temperatures, making sure you're not blowing the fans out at full speed. We try to optimize the farm for the fan speed was never more than 30%. So we did have some, when we start to see spiking up to 60, 70%, we would then look at that GPU. That GPU would be pulled. So you had like a normal day-to-day maintenance. BBT Todd was up there every day. So he would go to the farm every day and he could do onesie, twosie, switch outs or fixes with stuff, but trying to optimize where you're not blowing the fan out. As long as you're staying cool and stuff, longevity has been really, really good. So like we're going through the RX 478 gigs as an example right now, repasting, doing all that stuff. These things are still rock solid. They run perfectly fine. Though the retail GPUs that we had, the Red Devil 580, 8 gig cards, some of them the golden sample, some of them the regular ones, still working perfectly fine. We've actually bench test those with, into games, and I like run like 3D Mark as an example test, because I look at that as a good load test on it, and you just do a loop of that for set it for a 2-hour loop and it'll just keep running it, no artifacts, still running 2016 GPU, 2017 GPU, still today running perfectly fine. So I think what it comes down to is you start getting micro fractures and issues like in memory, and that if you're misconfigured, you have a potential. So one of the things like we suggest people to go to like hard forums and some of the Anodec forums, like if they're trying to buy onesie, twosie GPUs. What I would ask people to do if I was ever buying a GPU there is just have them run that test, run shoot me a video of a full end to end of it running 3D Mark. Like it's not hard. Somebody could download it for free. Yeah. If it's been mining its whole life, and just make sure it upholds it can handle something like that. That's going to give you a proper load test on the core and the memory. But I think longevity, as long as they were taken care of and they weren't, overvolting too heavily, which most people don't overvolt, they undervolt. Yeah. I think they're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I think the mining GPUs might be even in better condition than gaming GPUs in sort of way, since with mining you just have the same load, the same temperature, the fans are normally at the same speed, where at gaming the temperature go up and down, and that might be an issue. What about LHR cards? Do you have any of those?
Yeah, we have a few that we did some testing. We never bought a lot of them. I have a 3080 Ti, a 3080 version of that, and I think a 3070 LHR, just to do some testing. And for content on the channel, make sure people understood on how light hash rate works, and some of the advancements and some of the mining tools that try to circumvent some of that driver base functionality. I think it all comes back down to the companies trying to hit their core consumer and try to make a change to meet the requirement, and it's just them trying to make an effort, right? So I don't blame like NVIDIA doing it. Like I get it, their core customer is complaining hard on them, like dude, like all these minor, but it all comes back down to incentive, and that's a hard one to take on. I think especially in bull markets, it's like it's going to happen. People are going to buy GPUs. They're going to be in a line for them. People
would be buying pens if pens made money. We would run out of pens probably.
Yes, so. I mean it's an incentive thing. So we've tried to engage with all of them for years, and it's like I'm not trying to even like be a consultant or anything. I'm like, dude, just like let's get on a conference call and like brainstorm some ideas from a supply chain standpoint of maybe some other alternatives or options. I was really hoping that we would see by now like mining edition cards like at retail, like and I know they would get bought up, but like I still don't know why that's not a thing. Like it's a very simple math problem. Like I went and I talked this year at CES. I had talked to a couple of board partners like Gigabyte and MSI. I was like, guys, miners are buying all the GPUs, or they're buying a lot of the GPUs at the store. If you had a mining specific GPU at the store, do you think they're going to get bought? Like this isn't like if you're doing forecasting and planning and like, well, we just don't want to be stuck with them. I'm like, they're going to buy those versions, bro. Like they're going to get bought up just like any of the other GPUs. And if you can create like a whole separate fabrication cycle, because like GPU fabrication works a lot like the beer making that I was talking about. You create a batch, right? And that batch has so much wafers and stuff that are out of it. And then that batch is ran. And then you look at your statistics of buyout and all that, and you look, do we need to run? Are we going to run out of beer? Yeah, we're forecasting we are going to. So the fabrication centers, they're kind of doing a round robin of cycle because there's so much demand right now on the actual semiconductor industry anyways. But like there could be some cycles put in there for mining editions, and at least I would have liked to see the mining edition hitting retail than an LHR. That's what it comes down to. It's like they could have done two different things instead of altering software and then changing things on the GPU and saying we're light hash rate. They should have just went straight retail with mining edition GPUs and then push people. Now I know people would still go after some of the other GPUs, but if you can start to offset some of that demand with a more efficient, like the Sapphire 470s as an example, the 480s that we have are the best version of the Polaris card, bar none. Like a lot better than any of the retail editions. I mean, the 580 8 gig versions that we have from Sapphire are 33.15 mega hash at 78 watts. And that's a Polaris card from 2016 or 2017. Like that is better than any other 580 out there. It's a lower wattage by output, and it's a higher output. So, and it has that with a 30% fan speed sitting in a box by itself is 46C. If I do that to like a normal 580 8 gig card, I'm at 70C at 32 mega hash, right? So it's just the mining editions were designed better for mining, right?
Yeah, I think that the regular GPUs would be bought up anyway, because as long as people would make money on it, they would buy it. So as we discussed earlier, as long as the difficult doesn't match up the price, people will be buying GPUs, no matter the performance. Even if LHR GPUs would be limited to 20%, if that made money, people would buy it.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think
it's true.
So talking about manufacturers, what do you think about Intel's moves into the space?
I was actually really disappointed that at CES they didn't announce their GPUs, like the whole ARC series. Like I know that they exist. I know that they're going to use GDDR6. Like we know some facts about them, and we know effectively their bus width is going to be pretty decent. So I mean, they should be 60 mega hash cards. It all comes back down to power. I'm interested to see pricing. I mean, I'm surprised they didn't do it at CES. That was the time to do it, especially if they're looking at releasing sometime this year. But maybe they'll do it at one of their own conferences. But it is nice to see from their own semiconductor and the factories and stuff having an additional load of options that are going to be out there. And I think that that's good for the space. We'll see, what kind of volume issues they're going to have, or if they're going to do a launch and, instantly be sold out like everybody else. I'm cautiously optimistic on it, but it is nice to see a third player in it, right?
Maybe that's why they're purposely keeping it quiet for now, playing it down a bit.
Yeah. And I'm very interested to see what their ASIC, I mean, it's going to be years from before, at least 18 months, I would imagine, before we see their ASIC. I mean, they got the chip design fabricated. They're going to go through probably, I would assume, 6 months of testing now since talking about it. Are they going to put it on an array? How much power is it going to use? If you do the math on that, if you keep it in the same form factor, their output, because it's a lower, right, but it's lower wattage too. I think it's 170, 180 per chip, gigahash per chip at 2.5 watts versus 7 watts. So if you look at it, it might, if they keep, form factor is going to be a big thing. People are like, oh, that's going to be, this, if they try to get it up to 3,100, watts to keep it in line with like the current power infrastructure of most build outs, you're doing the M30S, plus, or the S19, and you're looking at anywhere from 2,800 watts to 3,500 watts or 3,600 watts. Like Intel's going to build that same thing. I look also at like form factor because it's got to fit in containers, it's got to fit on shelves. If it ends up being, I think the spec out that I saw was a 76 terahash at like 1800, 1900 watts. So like if that ends up being a thing, it's highly efficient. But again, it all comes back down to sizing. If it's only 70 terahash and now you have a container and you build it the same size as like an S19, then you're only going to get like, that container is, you could get a lot more output per your power demand that you're going to have, because you're not going to be able to fill out the 1.3 megawatt that container was built to. And now you're only going to be 700,000 watts, and now you're under, and you don't have the space to put more. So it's going to be interesting how they're going to do that, because it's cool going smaller chip, our same size chip, but like lower power wattage. But like now, like how many boards can I get on? How many? That's going to be the question I have.
Yeah. Speaking about ASICs, we have a question here about, do you think that ASICs will be still like thing for casual miners, for homeowners? I mean, there are ASICs with 5 kilowatts power draw. I mean, you can't connect that at your home, or I mean, that would be a hard thing to do.
Using a lot. I mean,
go on.
Well, you could get one. So I mean, it's like right now, like home miners, and we're seeing this right now proliferate, like just on Twitter and stuff. When China shut down, it changed everything, right? So now you have a lot more participation around the world, huge amounts of infrastructure being built in the U.S., huge amounts of interest being generated on the ASIC side. But again, it comes back down to sound, power, and heat. With, I would say, from the home, it pivots to be more around the sound being the most important thing. And then maybe part of the heat. Power-wise, most, at least homes in the U.S. are 200 amp. They're usually don't require near that. Most use about 80 amp or less. And it depends if like you're running your oven and your dryer at the same time type of thing. But, a house could handle one. We're going to test this unit that we found at CES from this company called Fog Hashing. I think they're new, but they had a unit running at CES, and it looks like has a small dry cooler connected to what looks like a little fridge box, and it's all immersion. So they had it running in there, and they could run that up to 170 terahash at like 4,600 watts. They had it in there, and they were talking about the custom firmware that they put on your S19. They had also set up for, a single unit. It was 46 decibels. So that was everything running, which is very low, right? So if you can get solutions like that, and the unit cost on it's actually pretty decent. It's $1,500. So I was like, you put a $10,000 miner and a $1,500 setup, and you got about $300 in dielectric fluid. And then it's 46 decibels, and you can put that somewhere in your house, and the output in the heat side is about 900 to 1200 BTU. So like you could have a small heater. In the summer, you might want to not have it in the house, but I think as the innovation starts to come around to where you can have solutions like that put together for homes, you could see one person putting one of them in their house type of thing. But yeah, building out like farms, it gets far easier. You could put 7 to 10 GPU rigs in your house, and do a grow tent or something to be able to extract the heat and pull it out, or you could do 1 to 2 ASICs max, right? So I think the volume side is still on the GPU side.
Too bad that will defy the first. I mean, the Bitcoin's white paper when Satoshi mentioned one vote, one CPU, one vote. So I wish that mining won't become like email has become Google Mail, sort of thing. So it's just it's not one company controlling everything, because that's defying the sole purpose.
I think we get this situation right now where there's a lot of exposure on those solo miners. And they just keep that. There was another block found like yesterday off of 86. So it's like the phenomenon. So people are like, why is this happening now? I mean, I can't tell you how many messages I've gotten just on this. Like, should I start solo mining all this? But why are now all these like USB ones finding? And I think the biggest distinct difference is because of the proliferation out of China and the separation of now more participation. You've had a lot of people try to get units, and there are onesie, twosie units. I mean, just to give you an idea, at Crypto World, we've brought in about 120 S19s over the last 2 months. we've sold those to over 70 customers. So that gives you an idea of the separation from 120 to 70 different individuals that have came in the store and just like bought one. And, so I think things like that to where people are buying one and just participating is huge. I think the fact that people are solo mining with them, taking the risk of never getting a payout, right? And winning. And mind you, this is like the lottery. So I would not,
I was going to say it's more like
I don't
gambling.
recommend it.
I actually did some calculations a couple of months ago, and the chances of winning a block with one S19 ASICs are better than winning a lottery. Like a couple of times. I would say 5 times better, but the reward is also smaller. So
yeah. I mean, it's not to like I saw somebody say on Twitter, like, oh, you could get struck by lightning twice. I'm like, no, those are way further odds. Like you have a much better chance. And interestingly, Ethereum's even better when you look at like, having a gigahash on it compared to like the terahash. It's actually orders of magnitude better a chance of winning. And there was somebody that won that $500,000 block, a solo miner, right, with a couple gigahash. And he was only doing it for 20 days. Like, can you imagine that? You have 2 gigahash on this and you win not just an Ethereum block, but you win like a 60 or 70 plus ETH block because it was with MEV and everything on it. Like, it's insane. But like, I don't recommend it. I think it's one of those things and people are like, do you do it? Like, I did a couple examples of it with a small amount when like Ravencoin was about to do its halving in December. I put like 500 mega hash on it and we won 2 blocks, which was insane. Like, it was way more than we should have won. I think the luck percentage on the first one was like 34%. The other one was 1%. So, I mean, it was just like pure luck. And then I stopped doing it. It halved. But we're still on Raven with part of the fund.
I remember first time placing orders on NiceHash hashpower marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
I was starting to mine Ravencoin, and I used I think it was a frosty pool or something like that. And I managed to, there was like a couple of miners there. Maybe they had like 1% of network share. And then I bought some hashpower and somehow we won the block and I got the full, basically the whole reward, like
oh, nice.
4,900.
4,990 usually.
Yeah, something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting time. And that's the thing about new networks and stuff too. I mean, this is what's great about this space is like, there's the big networks and there's the math behind it and there's what to mine and all these other things. And then you got some newer networks. I know Ton and a couple of the other ones that have came out and people are interested in them, and Reptorium when the
Alpha. Have you heard about this Alpha? I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but something Alpha, a new coin where it's on 5,000 on rank 5,000, and it has like quite good profitability, more than Ethereum right now.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I always liked it was the trolling on Bitcoin Talk and seeing, hey, who's coming out with something new or something next. And, this is the thing that people are like, what's going to take over Ethereum? It's like, well, I think there's some statistical things we can look at, like networks. And I've done a few models to show like what does price discovery have to get to be able to take on the Ethereum network, assuming a portion of its ASIC. But we never know what moves forward with proof of work if somebody takes a different solution and now has a little price discovery with it, and then before you know it, you have the next, I don't want to call it Ethereum from a profitability standpoint, but the one thing I've learned over all the years of mining since essentially almost the beginning is that there's no limit to people's ability to build things and try to move the needle on a space. And when you have a massive community that is super engaged in it, also highly invested in it, it's kind of like if you build it, they will come type of thing. But like people will redeploy that hash rate. And there are times that it pulls back and the network naturally reacts, right? I mean, we've seen Ravencoin did its halving, price discovery didn't happen yet, and it pulled actually back with the rest of the market, and hash rate went from 10 terahash to 3 terahash. It's a natural occurrence. Like the equilibrium will occur, right? And so the networks are very resilient in that way. But you never know what opportunity there is, and I just think that there's a lot of folks engaged in this space, and what the services you guys provide to give people an opportunity to kind of enter the space very easily through a tool. And that's a different model. It's a broker model, right? Where people will NiceHash sometimes has better rates because there's more people maybe forecasting. You'll see some front running on a network sometimes. Yep. We've seen that with Zcash back in the day, where there was like a spike, a whole bunch of Zcash purchase, before they had switched over to ASICs. And it's like, why is the hash rate running? And it kind of ran price. So there's a lot of game theory stuff going on there too. So you can kind of start to see if there's a spike in hash rate, like is price going to move? I think you'll see that with, Raven as an example. If it gets listed on Coinbase, there's always going to be a front run. Somebody knows information. They'll buy some hash rate. Yeah. And then you're like, why is Raven setting it? It was 3 terahash. Now it's back up to 10 and the price hasn't moved. It was like, well, give it a few days. Right. So I think you get some of those spikes. You've seen it with Bitcoin Gold, a couple of the other ones that you could mine with like SHA-256 at the time. And they switched to, to where you could use like your NVIDIA cards and stuff with it. But I mean, there's different things. So it's just being aware. That's the other messaging that I would always tell people is if you're into mining, I know it can be kind of fair weather. Sometimes you have a lot of fair weather folks, but pay attention to the networks, and understand, the different spikes and understand where things are going with it. And to give you an idea of probably what's coming.
So you're talking about NiceHash. A curious question. Have you mined with NiceHash before?
Absolutely. So we've done a couple of videos on just from an engagement standpoint to make sure people knew how to get in. And I've done some that really broke down the way the market works from you mining directly as a solo miner versus you mining to a pool, and to lay out like pool dynamics and how like share works and orphans and orphan to work, and then went into like the broker model to where you point your hash rate to a service, and that service then lists you on a board that then somebody can buy your hash rate from, and now you're brokered into receiving Bitcoin because essentially it's somebody paying for your hash rate and you guys providing that as a service. So it's kind of like a managed service aspect, concept of that, and then went into like cloud mining, cloud hosting, co-hosting, all that kind of stuff. So there's been a few like education videos just to let folks to understand kind of where your guys' tech sits in the stack from a broker standpoint, and then then having a different view of just like what's the opportunity given mining. There's a whole bunch of analysis with regards to like the opportunity of mining for Bitcoin or mining the coin directly, right? And I think there were some points in there that if you just had it on NiceHash for like the bear market, you would have done like way better, right? Like So when Bitcoin first started coming up. Now Ethereum, when it shot up to 4,800, it kind of offset it some, like if you were just mining Ethereum, but the difference is pretty significant for like a new person getting in because the barrier to entry is a lot lower, right? Yeah. So you have if they're just getting in, they have a Windows computer. That first step I was telling people, like if you've never done anything, to not have to all that config set up in the beginning, it's a much easier play.
I think that NiceHash will show its, let's say, power, so to speak, when there will be many coins like quite similarly profitable. Because for like average user, then you will have to manually switch or have some kind of software to switch between the coins, and additionally you will have to like exchange those coins, take care of the pools configuration, where at NiceHash you just simply get paid in Bitcoin and it does everything automatically. And basically you can set the percentage difference you want to at what percentage you want to change the algorithm. So and at NiceHash there's actually double profit switching. One is inside each algorithm, where buyers are the ones placing orders on different coins with the same algorithm, and then you have different algorithms. So there's actually double profit switching, so to speak.
Yeah, and I like the ability that you have the testing too from a configuration standpoint, where you can go through and benchmark and then see. And then there's like, I remember doing a video where I was showing, like just doing it vanilla and then doing it where you came in there and you alter some of your settings to reduce some power, and you can see that the output hadn't changed in the test. So using it as a benchmark too is interesting, for folks to see the difference on stuff. It's funny because, and I actually do for it, I haven't done it in a while. Most of the stuff we've just done in Linux and stuff, and you guys, it supports both, right? You can do it from Hive OS or Simple Mining OS. It's just pointing it to the, the NiceHash pool, but with your particular wallet address. But like just that simple setup and config, we're about due for a new video on that, but just to let folks understand the options, right? And again, it comes back down to education, options, and getting into this space. And I think it's always been the key to get more people involved in mining and potentially a counterparty to buy.
What do you prefer, efficiency or are you going for hash power? So I think that's mostly dependent on your electricity price, probably.
Yeah. Sometimes you're optimizing for what's the most hash rate that I can get. I don't want to say agnostic to your power. I mean, you always want to be conscious of your power usage, not just for your output of your power or the demand on your power, but also creates heat, right? So the more juice I'm flowing to that card, I'm creating more heat. So there's kind of a counter effect on the thermal side on it, but there could be argument on the longevity and then your fan performance, and that like if you're gonna have to spike your fan curves all the way up. I see a lot of my other fellow creators out there that have a lot of viewers and stuff, and I see their configs, and then I see like 100% fan speeds, and I'm like, no, you're gonna kill the fan in 9 months. You really want to optimize to where you're not blasting your GPUs at 100% fan speed. If you do that 24/7, 365, I don't care what kind of tech is in it, they're not going to last much.
It's going to die. Yeah.
It's going to burn them up. You're going to start losing fans after about a year. I think the best fans I've seen are non-ball bearing magnetic fans, and they can last sometimes up to 2 years, like full tilt. But they will fail.
So talking about fans, so what would you say for a home miners? Is it better to go for water cooled or air cooled?
I think from a cost standpoint in the beginning, you definitely go air cooled. When you start talking the larger operations, or if it's a medium operation at your home and you need to really look at heat issues and you really going in it long term, then immersion might be worth it to you, especially if you're in a more warmer climate. That's going to be a key factor. So, I know folks down in Texas have looking, especially West Texas, where you're just dry and it's hot all the time in the summer. Essentially have 3 months of cool period, and then the rest of it's 80 plus Fahrenheit. And looking at immersion will save you not just on the heat too. It's also just the maintenance of the GPUs. It changes the entire concept of having to clean off dust and fans and that kind of thing. And you also you're offset on the power side because like you're not using fans anymore in the immersion. However, you do have the dry cooler and that power. So it's actually you'll use a little more power, but it's not too bad. It all comes down to the size of the tank, the amount of cards you have in it, and where the power starts to offset, from that standpoint. But
okay. So let's talk about the future. What do you think that the future of mining will bring? GPU mining versus ASIC miner, for example.
So I think the future really comes back down to how much price discovery and growth we have in the space. I think it's very positive, and I think what it does is it starts to front run what gets built, right? So if we have a massive price increase across the board, to where we even have like a secondary coin that's proof of work mineable, like if it's Flux and parallel assets. I mean, we haven't even got into the concept of other alternative proofs of work, not just proof of work, but other options for miners such as Render Network and all these other things. If these get any kind of momentum and you have a huge proliferation there, you're going to have a pretty large demand cycle on stuff. I think the future is hopefully where we'll have more options in the participation side. On the retail, I think retail market's massive and huge and required growth. Hopefully supply chains get figured out and we have more folks on that. But I also think we're gonna have a lot of ESG concern just because people are still not going to give up on the idea that we're using a lot of power. So efficiency is going to be key. I mean, it's always good to use less of anything, but you can't let it drive your option to not use. I mean, people are not freaking out about using hair dryers and stuff, right? So you still got to dry your clothes, and those use a lot of power too. So good engagement and discussions, and understand that if we are going to start to change the entire way fintech and the financial network works, where we all are using these systems, having an understanding that some of them do use power, but the Intel's going to be interesting. I think that's another big one to look for this year. And then, let's see if ETH 2.0 actually happens this year, or we're having this discussion this time next year and seeing if it's still going to happen in 23, which is going to grossly affect the GPU miners. Yep.
How do you think that's going to affect participation? That's something you mentioned a few times today. Proof of stake, for example.
Yeah, I mean,
it kind of limits some aspects of participation. What do you think of that?
Well, it does. I mean, so if there's not a price discovery on any of the other tokens to get the option to shift, right? I've said many times, I think the highest probability of growth comes to Ethereum Classic because the least amount of config change for the miners, right? So essentially they're flipping a few switches and then everything's the same. Nobody has to change their power profile, any of that. It just switches over. So I think that kind of could front run ETH Classic. And we did see price discovery up to $175 this year, even though it was just a quick spike at 25 terahash. So to give everybody an understanding, ETH went down to 86 terahash in March 2020 with 150 terahash, or $86, price point with 150 terahash on the network. So 5 times more hash rate on ETH's network at that time, right? So if that transition happens, it looks and feels a lot like Ethereum, right? We can calculate profitability. We can calculate things around Ethereum Classic a lot easier because it's a 1-to-1, right? So what's price need to be to uphold, 900 terahash, right? At least a couple $1,000 ETH Classic price. What if it drops back down to where it's 150 terahash? Well, right now, current pricing handles about 70 terahash. So we can start to figure out kind of the math on it 1-to-1. Ravencoin would have to be, which would be probably the next second largest, really would need to get in that. Now, since it's halved, it would really need to get into that almost dollar range to be able to hold. And so 10x or more than 10x, about a 20x of where it's at right now, because it needs to go 10x to get back up, because they're around 5.5 to 6 cents, right? It needs to get to 10 cents and then another 100x on top of that to get, or 10x to get up to $1. So it needs to have some serious price discovery to be able to handle, hundreds of terahash that would move over, which would then turn into half that for Ravencoin, right? So, so I think it's a mix of all of them. Need to have some pretty strong price discovery to be able to handle the current network. But I think what we'll have is exactly what we've seen with Ravencoin. I think if and when Ethereum moves over, you're going to see a massive receding of hash rate. People will power down and try to look at the footprint and saying, okay, what happens now? And then see if any of these coins get a pricing discovery. So it's not going to be, something unbelievable and magical. It's just literally people are going to power off and figure out, okay, what's next? And maybe a few spikes to these other networks, right? I've done some models of the day that switches, everybody moves over to Ethereum Classic, and Ethereum Classic magically goes to 300 terahash, and then everybody's like, wait, this yield sucks, and then they'll shut down. So I think we'll see some of that, and maybe that all that hash rate moving over to give it a lot of signal to noise. There's the one thing I don't think anybody's calculating is the fact that when this happens, and I'm not saying if it happens, I think Ethereum will figure it out and they'll take the risk because
they're just nuts, and they're going to want to separate this network. And there's going to be, you think Solana shutting down all the time is going to be hilarious. Wait until they lose assertion between two networks, which is what's going to happen, which they already have in the test net, right? You're literally, ETH1 continues to go on. It's holding all the smart contracts and everything. This is only moving consensus over to Beacon, right? So you're going to have both networks running and inheriting the consensus from the other network. Right there, it shows you an interleave, and you're always going to have issues with trying to find assertion. They're already seeing that on the dev network. So I have absolute confidence there'll be issues if they push forward, and then we'll see that drama play out. If that ends up going and then everybody switches over, there's going to be huge signal to noise on who's next, right? So Ethereum Classic, Ravencoin, Flux, Ergo, all of them are going to get press, right? Because everybody's going to be trying to shake out who inherits all this potential hash rate. So that noise is probably going to push the price, I would assume, a little bit, just because the statistical value of getting that much exposure from like CNBC and everybody. There's going to be punch list. I mean, I've already had folks reach out from some of these places, CoinDesk and CNBC, asking who's now, like, what we've seen a model, somebody linked this to a video to you, you seem to be aware of this, like, what networks, where do we start? And it was really just kind of their research wing trying to get an understanding of it, right? So that already gives me enough telemetry to show that they're going to have articles about it, and we're going to see a lot of like what's going to get it. So I think that signal helps push some of these coins up a little, but really it comes back down to usability. I mean, Ethereum's proved it. Like if you have enough demand of people leveraging the network for things, happens to be NFTs. Everybody thought it was going to be DeFi. NFTs driving a lot of the Ethereum demand right now. I mean, just look at where the transactions are going, right? So NFT, can Ethereum Classic inherit some of that? Do people care? I think it comes back down to Bitcoin's the number one and will always be the number one most sought after scarcity thing. Ethereum, even with its troubles and its amount of, amount of people that are on it and trying to use it, NFT standpoint, it's still kind of the de facto gold standard of the NFT, even with all the fees. Solana had an opportunity, but it keeps failing and shutting down the network for multiple days. And I think that's going to hurt it a lot. Polkadot's just in the background. I mean, nobody talks about Polkadot. Avalanche is moving a little further, but part of the problem with Avalanche is it's super, super centralized, very highly centralized, and a lot of their network stuff is federated. So, like, I just don't see it. And I literally tried to get a talk with Cardano's top guy, Charles Hotchkiss, and I saw him at CES. We sat and talked for, I don't know, about 20 minutes in the middle of CES, just BSing back and forth about Cardano. And, he was talking about the kind of links with like Ergo and like the proof of the proof of work with like proof of useful work stuff that he was talking about. But like, I just don't see it unless, I think Flux is a little further along on like parallel asset stuff. Like there is a coming of potential use of those GPUs, if it's parallel asset mining or if it's a tie to like computational fluid dynamics stuff with like render network, doing like 3D modeling and computational fluid, the CFL stuff or CFD stuff. There's something that I think is in play for that, but like, it's a future out from that. So, I mean, I think bottom line, there's going to be a place to go, but I think it's going to have a pretty massive dip the moment that happens. And then all of us are going to be stepping back and watching all the issues that Ethereum is going to run into for trying to force this thing. See how that works.
Imagine Bitcoin going to proof of stake.
Yeah, it won't happen. I mean, it's just, I saw a meme the other day that I think sums it up the best. It's like having the exercise bike and doing the work, or having a whole bunch of stuff sitting on the exercise bike, right? It's proof of stake. I own the thing, but it's not doing anything, right? Like you have to put in the work, right? So it's, you're not going to get into shape. You're not proving anything if you own that asset, right? It's very disengaged way of holding a network, right?
Like just because I bought something doesn't mean anything, right? It's the use of it. It's the thing. So I think that's the fundamental issue with proof of stake, is that its incentive structure gets to where you get to a conglomerate kind of setup, right? You get into the Rothschilds, you get into the larger companies that will take if it gets price discovery, they'll just buy it all up. Where in the proof of work side, we're already seeing what's happened. I mean, there's big companies that are Riot and Wystone and like some of these other Foundry, big investment companies getting into it, but there's only so much power in some area, right? So you have a natural distribution, and not everybody has deals or can build in particular areas. So you could have the best crew in the world to build you a farm. And I would say Foundry and Riot are doing some of the biggest builds in the world right now. 400 megawatt. It's taken them 3 years, right? So the proof of even build to get to the proof of work is not fast, and there's effort to it, and there's a lot of investment to it. So one entity will only grow so big in that concept where you'll have multiple entities all over concurrently doing it, because they're all going to get in it, because it's all the chase. If the price goes, Bitcoin goes parabolic again, and we push to $200,000, the Bitcoin network's still going to do this because they can't build fast enough, right? So we're seeing it right now. It's still highly profitable. So yeah, proof of work is the best way right now, by far.
Then we're going to see corporations like, I think was that for the oil, OPEC. Is it OPEC?
Yeah.
Similar for the miners.
Well, that's the risk on the regulatory front that people are concerned about, right? The risk on the regulatory front isn't. I think the biggest existential risk on the oppression of not understanding it and then trying to regulate that environment, which is why all of us in all of our different countries need to make sure we have some sort of, I don't even call it lobbying, but just to make sure people have that education to be like, okay, try to understand what you're talking about here.
So you know what you're actually regulating. Yeah.
And then have enough content out there to for them to make decisions on, assuming there's not a huge amount of corruption, all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, that's another big thing, but there's a whole other existential attack on that vector of like pointing out corruption and that kind of stuff. But like making sure that the regulatory front is done at a country level, because I think it's very important to the people and the constituents of a country. If it goes to like G8 level and now it's looking at like globalization control type of thing, and it's like we all got like all the countries get together, leaders, and they're like, oh, we got to figure this out. Do we want this? And then if they collectively try to attack it, certain areas like the U.S. is still, like I said, it's going to be super hard no matter what the administration wants to do, just because the states operate in such. I mean, you can smoke marijuana in like half the states in the U.S. It's still federally illegal, right? So like the states will have no problem fighting the federal government on stuff, and it'll just lock it into court. And they don't roll in tanks and stuff in the U.S. That's not the way it works, right? So it's separated. So they'll want to push an agenda, but they still have to get the buy-in from the people, right? And that's still a good structure. And there's violence and there's riots and shit happens, right? But like, it's still, there's a path to it. And I think as long as they don't try to G8 it, and get the large countries, China's already moved forward with trying to ban a lot of stuff and get control of their structures. The Russian, not government, the central bank, right, made a statement, and everybody's freaking out about it. But statements and execution, completely different things. So if the government's not putting out a thing, if Putin's not putting it out, right, officially, I'm not listening to it, right? It's like, whatever. Like, they can say whatever. Like, anybody can say whatever. Senator Warren, hates Bitcoin mining, but it doesn't affect, like, the policy making, right? It's just a statement. So I want to see it from the policymakers. I want to see it from the leaders and their direction. And then it's something. China, leader said it, people rolled in and shut people down, right? So it's a different, like when we start seeing that kind of thing, Kazakhstan cut off the internet for a bit, and it was like, let's get a handle on it, right? And now it's back on, right? And there a lot of entities are coming back. So, I think it comes back down to leadership, and that's what the focus is, and it's our responsibility, living within the districts and everything else, to make sure that we're educating people to
What questions do they got? Why are people doing this? Well, it's participation. There's natural freedoms with it, and then we just make sure they're educated on it.
Okay. The last question: where do you see mining in 1 year and in 10 years? How do you see the future of mining?
I think we're going to see a continued growth, especially in the the kind of North American hemisphere right now. There's a huge amount of buildup. The 10-year outlook, I will say that I see it going into a place to where governments are going to make a decision: is it critical infrastructure or not? I think that's the next big hurdle. If large governments consider it that this is a portion of the future when it comes to fintech, and it's a portion of the future when it comes to the ability to communicate, like Web3, then they understand the security of that architecture is held up by a conglomerate of independent people, like just doing their own, like a sector of, like it's its own sector, and there's individual participants, there's companies that are in it, that kind of thing. If they look at it that way, which is the way I think it is, then they're going to deem it, there's going to be an inflection point of where they're like, this is critical infrastructure. That means a lot of things in like the United States, critical infrastructure now falls under different, it goes from just like public works to like homeland type of thing. So like, then it gets into a lot more security requirements and that kind of stuff. It becomes like a data center type of concept. If it comes into where it becomes critical infrastructure, then I think we see a solidification of mining. And now it's a matter of how renewable can we get? Are there initiatives and incentives to move to renewable versus pushing on people? It's more of like, hey, if you can try to get your energy mix as renewable as possible over this much time, it's the path. Like you start getting into structured incentives to start moving to that. And then maybe there's some kind of co-investment from a miner to help build out infrastructure. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, there for miners to kind of lead the way on that kind of stuff. So I think that's where it's going to go. I think we're already seeing massive infrastructure. You don't have that kind of investment in these areas without with blinders on. So I think at the end of the day, the leadership understands that this is going to be, I don't want to call it too big to fail, but it does affect a lot of things. If it was just mining, this is the thing. If it was just mining, the focus was mostly on mining, I think they could try to shut it down. The fact that it's in the fabric of people's investments, whole other game, right? Yep. This just doesn't affect, miners. This affects everybody in the stack, and miners are the security of that network. So the fintech people, if miners were attacked very heavily from a legislative standpoint, the fintech folks, the sailors, the big investment groups, Grayscale, would go, whoa, you're messing with my security.
Yeah, that's good thinking, yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's going to be their argument. Like, hey, don't mess with the security, man. You're going to make this unstable. What holds this asset up is the fact that nobody can change that. So you start messing with the security and immutability, and that's going to be the counter argument, right?
So it comes down to the price, price going up. This is actually very good. People investing money in Bitcoin, it draws the development of blockchain technology. I think that's very crucial part of people. Yep. I think it reminds me on .com bubble, where there was a lot of companies trying to do something, and because of the money inflow, companies like Google and Amazon were able to start.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I just think there's going to be, and there's opportunity for some of those. Practically Ethereum 2.0 is going to run on all the clouds. That's part of the issue too. But there's going to be, and that's going to be what's interesting too. As much as I kind of tongue in cheek, and I'm not making fun of it. It's just tongue in cheek. You see that infrastructure, Solana, Avalanche. A lot of this stuff is running on the world's clouds, right? Because again, it all comes back down to incentive and risk. Everything comes down to like any kind of proposal, any kind of structure is like, what's my risk? What's my assumptions? What can I control and what can I not control, right? You do like just a whole, and then you can bust out SWOT analysis on all that when you're looking at business structure and all that stuff. So like you look at like these world networks that are not just mining networks or the proof of stake networks, they're going to be sitting on the world clouds, right? And that's, I think that is an existential risk for all kinds of reasons, right? I mean, you look at Parler, you look at things that don't meet the intent, and then if you get politicians, you get people that are against the entire narrative of crypto, and they're like, well, we're going to shut it down. And it's like, well, you can't shut it down. It's everywhere. And they're like, we can shut down the clouds from doing it because we can give them an executive order to say that this is a existential threat to something. And then the clouds get a notice and say, you don't want to be in that business anymore. And then they just start killing ports for that stuff, right? And then now you're disconnected. You could take down, I mean, we've seen it already with Ethereum once on Infura with all the smart contracts and looking at, Oracle architecture based on the same thing. And then Infura nodes end up having a problem and nobody can get connected to the smart contract. And it's like, well, it's all sitting on Amazon. And then, now they have it in different availability zones, but the first kind of structure was like in one availability zone. So like there is some risk when you centralize, or I would call it more federated, because you could be multi-cloud, right? You could be Google, GCP, you could be Azure, you could be global with that too, right? On some of their global data centers. But when you start centralizing some of that infrastructure up to the global clouds, it's not more than just the redundancy risk. It's the belly button risk, right? If somebody pushing on an administration somewhere, shutting it down because they know that most of the infrastructure, and that's an easy, like there's RFPs, like or RFIs, requests for information, right? The governments do, and it's not just the U.S. All governments do this, right? For proposals, and it's a simple thing like, give me the network architecture layout of Avalanche, right? And then somebody will go chase that cheddar and take that contract and happily give them the entire infrastructure layout based on the nodes and where they're at, by and large, of where everything's at. Try to go do that with Bitcoin. They're not doing it through network. They're trying to do a power analysis, right? They're trying to figure out where the hotspots are. And most of that information is going to be protected through privilege, because it's a customer file, right? And a customer database, right? So like you're not, and it's just all this distribution, like proof of work. It's such an easy argument. Like I love getting into these, like when I'm at Crypto World and stuff, people are like, oh, proof of stake versus proof of work. I'm like, where do you want me to begin? Right? Like it's just the distribution model is completely different. It's not that it's bad. There's an effort with easier user interfaces, speed to delivery. There's all those benefits of the trilemma, right? That you can start to inherit an option. But I think the best approach in the long run, if you're going to do that kind of thing, is doing some kind of side chaining, parachains, mixed with checkbook blocks on proof of work, right? So the worst case, if you're going to go that rate, is having proof of work as being part of that cycle, where you're at least getting checkpoints. And you have an incentive out there for people to uphold that structure in that security through proof of work. Like Dash did, they went hybrid, so like, I think that's the long-term, we're talking again about long-term, is people taking it's only going to take one or two of these big ones and then some kind of negative movement at a global scale towards crypto. Like if we have like a really dark time, as we call it, like, where it just seems like everybody's against it for some reason, from a policy standpoint. And then we see some shutting down of like maybe potential big networks, or we have a Parler event with like, where all the global clouds are incentivized to shut it down. Then that's going to shake the industry to go, well, guess who's going to still be up? Bitcoin, right? Or if Ethereum still hasn't moved over, like, well, maybe we don't move to proof of stake now. I think the wavering of that can happen very quickly if something super negative happens on global clouds, like from an initiative standpoint. So I think Vitalik, just watching him on Up Only TV with Kobe this last week, watching how quick he would change, like he's changed his opinion on a few things. I think he could be quickly convinced if he felt there was an existential threat to proof of stake things getting shut down. And I think it all comes back down to like, well, we really were trying to get the energy initiative, but we also got to be able to stay up, right? So I think that's what it's going to come down to. And in the next 3 years, I think we're going to find that out. We're going to find out where the global community sits on their tolerance with cryptos in general of how to interact against global fintech. But if they sit on their hands, it's just Web3 is going to take it over, and all the younger generations just going to start using it. It's going to be integrated. You got Jack building stuff into the apps and stuff. It's just going to be like, we're not even using traditional finance anymore. It's just going to all happen on Web3.
So yeah, that's some really good insight. Very interesting to talk.
Yeah.
I would say the good moral of the story is keep mining.
Yeah. Keep mining and learn more. Learn as much as you can. Right?
Exactly.
Learn more about this space, be engaged. If you're a developer, do the basics. Every couple of weeks, Ravencoin. I'm always pitching Ravencoin. It's proof of work, and I believe in its vision. They have like an open dev call, and they are trying to get new developers. So it doesn't matter if you have any experience, right? They work you through setting up the IDE. So that's the integrated development environment, how to get your stuff configured for C++, some fresher courses. You could go in there with no knowledge, right? So like things like that, I think are big. I think every community should have that. Like if the developer community, they invest time to write code.
To teach and to train people, yeah.
Yeah, split that time. Like I always tell people, like the best thing you can do, like people are like, why do you have 8 people working for you? Like that's crazy. Like because I can do so much more, and there's a math problem to make sure that we're covering ends on everybody. But like if I can copy myself 8 times to do certain activities, it's unbelievable the throughput of things that happen. So if a developer that's a good developer, and I used to run a lot of development shops, my background in history all the way back into the AV days was development. So I ran development, huge development shops, 100 plus people, 8 different agile teams. The best thing I could do is always do like a paired programming in the beginning with a new guy and a kind of medium to senior dev. Get them to know the basics, how to check in things properly, how to do all this. Spend 2 weeks with them, 3 weeks, and then give them small things. Like replicate your experience for the basics. And if you can do that on the dev side on like the crypto networks, we're going to get a lot more material. We're going to get a lot more content that's supporting the things that we're mining, right? So developers are key. We've seen the explosion with Ethereum because of the development, and a lot of those Ethereum developers moving over to some of those other projects to get more velocity, right? Because Ethereum and Bitcoin are like big ships, and they don't move often. It takes them a while to steer. So teams going over to rapid application development. Yeah, if you're interested and you end up watching this stream and you never developed, like look into that. Ravencore Discord does it. I think even Flux does this too. Look into these different networks and see if there's development opportunities, and just do it on the night, spend the evenings when you're surfing YouTube, start learning how to develop, and, it change everything. It'll change your perspective on how to approach problems, and it's highly recommended.
I think we could do a whole new episode on that. Understanding the development of blockchain and mining, and
absolutely.
Yeah. We're gonna have to wrap it up. It's been really great to talk to you. Some fantastic insights from all the different angles of mining. Really great to hear from you. Hope we'll hear from you again in the future. Let's see where Ethereum is at in a year's time or something like that. But thanks everyone for watching us today. It's been great to have BBT Carter here joining us today, talking all about mining. Remember to check out his channel. Go and check out BitsBeTrippin on YouTube. And of course, subscribe to NiceHash and get the latest episode of NiceTalk, where we're always talking with crypto industry experts and the latest in the crypto industry. Thanks all for today.
Awesome. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.